She was a poor grandmother with no money for a train ticket, no phone to call, and a grandson 90 miles away who was dying. So she climbed onto the old horse she had raised from a foal, wrapped her shawl tight, and began the ride. No map, no supplies, just hope. What she endured on that road, and the impossible thing that happened at the hospital gates, will make you question everything you know about love. In a forgotten mountain village, a 72-year-old widow named Anna had only two things left: an old mare called Estrella and a grandson dying of leukemia 90 miles away. When the hospital called with the final warning, there was no bus fare, no taxi, no time. So she climbed onto the horse she had raised from a foal and started riding. She carried no map, no money, just a piece of bread. What she didn't know was that the highway ahead had been closed for years, and what lived in those abandoned mountains would soon come for her. Anna had lived her entire life in the village of San Telmo, a place so remote that the modern world seemed to have forgotten it existed. She had no car, no bank account, no husband. He had died 30 years earlier in a mining accident. All she had was a small stone house, a garden that barely fed her, and Estrella, a chestnut mare she had raised from the day the foal was born in her own stable. Estrella was old now, her joints stiff, her gallop long faded to a patient walk, but Anna trusted her more than any human she knew. Her grandson, Tamaz, was 15. He had been diagnosed with acute lymphoblastic leukemia 2 years ago. The boy lived with his mother, Anna's daughter, in a city that might as well have been on another planet, 90 miles away over the Sierra Negra mountains. For months, Anna had received fragments of news through a neighbor's phone: the chemotherapy, the relapses, the bone marrow transplant that didn't take. Then, on a Tuesday evening, the call came. The hospital had done everything. Tamaz had days, maybe less. He was asking for her. Anna had no way to get there. The only bus from the nearest town had stopped running during the pandemic and never resumed. She had no money for a private car, even if one could be found. When she asked the village elder for help, he shook his head and told her the truth she already knew. The old highway that cut through the mountains had been officially closed for 7 years. A landslide had buried half a mile of asphalt, and the government had simply abandoned it, diverting all traffic to the new coastal road that added 100 miles to the journey. But there was a path, barely a trail, that locals still whispered about. It followed the old route on horseback, but no one had attempted it in years. The mountains, they said, were no longer safe. Anna didn't hesitate. She filled a cloth sack with a loaf of hard bread, a water bottle, and a photograph of Tamaz as a child. She took her late husband's woolen shawl, the one she had woven for their wedding. Then she walked to the stable, placed her hand on Estrella's grey muzzle, and whispered a promise: "We are going to see my boy, just one more time." The mare, as if understanding, dipped her head and let Anna climb onto her bare back. The trail began behind the old church and quickly swallowed them in a forest of twisted pines. Within an hour, the village had disappeared. The only sounds were the creak of Estrella's hooves on loose stone and the distant cry of a hawk circling overhead. The air turned colder, thinner. Anna wrapped the shawl tighter and kept her eyes fixed on the invisible line forward. What she didn't know was that the abandoned highway had become home to things far more dangerous than landslides. 3 years earlier, a pack of feral dogs, descendants of pets left behind when the last trucks rumbled through, had multiplied in the ruins of a collapsed tunnel. They had grown lean, territorial, and unafraid of humans. Hikers who had attempted the crossing had come back, with stories of glowing eyes in the dark and guttural growls that echoed off the canyon walls. One man had never come back at all. Anna and Estrella reached the first shattered section of the highway as the sun began to sink behind the jagged peaks. The concrete was split in great slabs, tilted like gravestones, with weeds sprouting through the cracks. A rusted road sign, half buried in mud, still warned, "Curva Peligrosa, dangerous curve." Beyond it, the trail narrowed to a ledge barely wide enough for a horse. Anna looked down. A sheer drop fell into mist. She tightened her grip on Estrella's mane and pressed on. They were deep in the mountain's shadow now. The wind had stopped. A strange, heavy silence descended, the kind that makes your own heartbeat sound like a drum. Estrella's ears flicked backward. She snorted sharply. Anna felt it too. They were being watched. She turned her head slowly. Among the dark trees, something shifted, a low shape, then another. And then the growl began. Anna froze. The growl wasn't like a dog barking in a yard. It was low, wet, and hungry. Estrella stamped a hoof on the broken asphalt, her muscles tensing beneath Anna's legs. Then the shape stepped out of the tree line. 3 dogs, ribs visible beneath patchy fur, eyes glowing yellow in the last light. The lead animal, a massive brown creature with a torn ear, bared teeth that hadn't seen a meal in days. They were feral, yes, but worse. They were starving enough to attack a horse. Anna had faced danger before. She'd survived a dictatorship, a dead husband, and a mudslide that buried half her village, but never on a ledge with a sheer drop to her right and wild dogs to her left. She did the only thing she could think of. She pulled the woolen shawl from her shoulders and waved it high above her head, shouting the loudest, most primal scream her 72-year-old lungs could produce. The sound echoed off the canyon walls, a banshee cry of pure desperation. The dogs hesitated. The pack leader stopped, tilting his head. For 3 heartbeats, nothing moved. Then Estrella did something extraordinary. The old mare, stiff and weary, suddenly reared onto her hind legs, hooves pawing the air, and let out a whinny that shook the trees. Anna clung to her mane, nearly slipping, but the display worked. The dogs scattered, yelping, disappearing into the underbrush. Estrella dropped back to all fours, trembling. The ledge was too narrow for flight. Anna didn't wait. She guided Estrella forward, inch by inch, until they reached a wider embankment where the highway had once curved into a rest stop. The sun was gone. The darkness in the mountains is absolute, the kind that drowns stars. She found a concrete drainage pipe, half collapsed, and they crawled inside. There was no fire, no light, just the sound of the wind and the distant echo of the dogs, still circling somewhere above. It was in that black tube, shivering against her horse's warm flank, that Anna spoke aloud, not to herself, but to the boy she was riding toward. She told Tamaz about the day he was born, how his mother had nearly died in labor, how Anna had walked 10 miles through a storm to reach the hospital. She told him about the time he had broken his arm climbing a mango tree and how he never cried. And she told him a secret she'd never shared with anyone. She was sick, too. A tumor, the doctors had said 6 months ago. It was slow growing, they said. They could operate. She had told no one, not her daughter, not Tamaz, because she didn't want them to worry, didn't want to be a burden when all their energy was focused on saving the boy. But now, in the cold dark, she admitted the truth. She had no plans to get surgery. She had accepted that her time might also be short, and if she was going to die, she would die knowing she had held her grandson one last time. When dawn broke gray and cold, Anna crawled out of the pipe. Her joints screamed. Estrella's leg had a shallow bite wound on the hock, already swollen. There was no antiseptic, no bandage. Anna tore a strip from her shawl and wrapped it as tightly as she could, whispering apologies. The horse nuzzled her shoulder as if to say, "I'm not done yet." Then they continued, following the ghost of the old highway, now nothing more than a cracked ribbon clinging to the mountainside. The morning revealed the true devastation of the landslide. Half a mile of road had simply sheared away, leaving a raw scar of mud and rock that tumbled into the valley. For a moment, Anna thought the journey was over. There was no path, but then she saw it, a goat trail, barely visible, winding around the landslide above. It was so narrow that a horse would have to balance on loose scree, a 1,000-foot drop waiting with a single misstep. Estrella had been a mountain horse her whole life. She had carried firewood, grain sacks, and once a wounded neighbor to the clinic. But she was old, and she was injured, and the trail was madness. Anna closed her eyes and thought of Tamaz. She thought of his thin face, the way his hair had fallen out from the chemo, the way he still smiled when she entered the room. Then she pulled the photograph from her sack, the one of him at age 5, holding a paper airplane. She tucked it inside Estrella's bridle so it fluttered like a tiny flag. "They are waiting for us," she said, and the horse took the first step. It took 40 minutes to cross that stretch, 40 minutes of Anna not breathing, of Estrella placing each hoof with the precision of a surgeon. Stones clattered into the abyss. Once, a chunk of earth gave way beneath Estrella's rear leg, and the mare scrambled desperately, her heart pounding so loud Anna could feel it in her own chest. But somehow, impossibly, they made it. On the other side, Anna dismounted and kissed the ground, then kissed her horse's forehead, leaving a mark of dust on her lips. They were now less than 30 miles from the hospital, but the road ahead would not be easier, because what Anna didn't know, what no one had told her, was that the mountain's heart held a different kind of predator. Not feral dogs, not landslides, but something colder, something that had been watching them since they first stepped onto the abandoned highway. A storm born in the high peaks was racing toward them with wind speeds that would turn loose stone into shrapnel. The local farmers called it La Llorona Asterisk, the weeping woman, because the wind through the canyon sounded like a mother crying for her lost children. The first gust hit them without warning. It ripped the photograph from Estrella's bridle and sent it spinning into the air. Anna screamed and lunged, but it was gone, a white speck vanishing over the edge. The sky turned black in seconds. Rain came sideways, then hail, then a howl that shook the ground. Anna and Estrella pressed against a rock face, but the wind was tearing at them, trying to pull them into the void. Estrella's bite wound began bleeding through the bandage, the rain washing pink streaks down her leg. Anna prayed, not the polite prayers of Sunday Mass, but the raw, guttural bargaining of a soul that has nothing left. And then, in the midst of the storm's roar, she heard a sound that made her blood run cold. Not wind, not thunder, but a human voice, sharp and urgent, shouting her name. "Anna, si está cayendo. Anna, it's collapsing." She squinted through the rain and saw 2 figures on the path ahead, men in bright orange rescue jackets, gesturing wildly. Someone had reported her missing. A search party, but their warning came too late. Above them, the saturated earth gave a deep, wet groan, and a wall of mud and rock began to slide. The sound was not a groan, it was a roar, the mountain tearing itself apart. Anna saw the wall of mud and rock coming, a wave of earth tall as a church. The 2 rescuers lunged forward, one of them grabbing her arm, the other seizing Estrella's bridle. They pulled with everything they had, but the horse was frozen, her injured leg buckling. For one endless second, Anna was sure it was over. She would die here, buried in cold mud, and Tamaz would slip away in a sterile room, neither of them knowing the other had tried. Then Estrella screamed, a sound Anna had never heard from any animal, and found her legs. She surged forward, dragging the second rescuer with her, and the 4 of them tumbled into a shallow drainage ditch just as the landslide thundered past. Boulders the size of refrigerators bounced over their heads, smashing into the valley below. The noise was deafening, and then it was silent. For a long moment, nobody moved. Anna was pinned against the ditch wall, mud filling her mouth, her shawl torn away. She could feel Estrella's body trembling against her side, the mare lying down but breathing. The rescuer who had grabbed her was a young woman with a gashed forehead, blood streaming down her face. The other rescuer, an older man with grey stubble, crawled toward them, checking pulses. They were alive, all of them. The landslide had missed them by less than 10 feet. The man introduced himself as Captain Morales of the Regional Civil Defense. They had been searching for Anna for 6 hours, ever since a neighbor in San Telmo had raised the alarm. But they had not expected to find her here in the heart of the dead zone. What they told her next changed everything. The call that had sent Anna riding into the mountains, the one saying to Mars had only days, was already out of date. The hospital had been trying to reach her with an update, but there was no signal in the village. The boy's condition had actually stabilized slightly, a temporary reprieve that no one could explain. But more critically, a new donor had been identified, a rare bone marrow match that might actually save him. The transplant was scheduled in less than 48 hours, and the doctors required a biological relative to sign the consent forms. Anna was the only family close enough to do it. Anna closed her eyes and felt a sob tear through her chest, not of pain but of disbelief. She was not riding to a deathbed. She was riding to a chance at life. But she had to be there in time. The transplant could not happen without her signature, and the window was closing. Every hour she had spent fighting dogs and landslides had been an hour that might still cost her grandson his life. And now Estrella was down. The mare had given everything, and her leg was bleeding freely, the swelling so severe that standing seemed impossible. Captain Morales assessed the situation frankly. "We need to get you to the city, but my vehicle is 3 miles back on the other side of the collapse. We don't have a stretcher for the horse. She can't walk, I'm sorry." Anna refused to accept it. She crawled to Estrella, pressing her hands against the mare's heaving side. The horse's eye rolled toward her, that deep, dark eye that had looked at Anna with trust since the day she was born. Anna made a decision that surprised even herself. She would not leave Estrella to die on this mountain, not after everything. So she asked the rescuers to splint the leg, using the metal rods from their equipment packs and strips from their own jackets. The young medic hesitated, but Captain Morales saw the fire in Anna's eyes and nodded. They worked for over an hour, cleaning the wound as best they could, binding the leg firmly. Estrella endured it with a stoicism that made even the hardened captain stop and stroke her muzzle gently. Then, with a groan that seemed to come from the earth itself, the mare pushed herself to her feet. She stood unsteadily, the leg trembling, but she stood. Anna mounted bareback once more, and the impossible journey continued. They moved at a crawl now, the rescuers flanking them, getting them away from the worst of the damage. The storm had blown itself out, leaving a raw, glittering landscape of wet rock and broken trees. The air was bitterly cold. Captain Morales radioed for an emergency helicopter extraction, but the mountains blocked all signals. They were on their own until they reached the valley. As they walked, the medic, whose name was Lucia, examined Anna. She noticed the old woman wincing with each step Estrella took, a hand pressed to her abdomen. Lucia asked permission to check her vitals, and what she found made her face go pale. Anna's skin was clammy, her pulse erratic, and a lump was palpable just under her ribs. Anna, seeing the question in the young woman's eyes, told her the truth about the tumor. Lucia immediately told the captain they needed a medical evacuation for both, but Anna refused. "My grandson is dying," she said quietly. "I don't matter anymore." Captain Morales stopped walking and turned to face her. He was a man who had seen too much tragedy in these mountains, bodies pulled from landslides, children lost in floods. But something in Anna's voice reached him. He told her that her life did matter, that Tamaz would never forgive himself if he learned she died trying to save him. And then he told Anna something she had not known. The hospital had issued a media alert about her disappearance. Her story, the grandmother riding an old horse through the mountains to see a dying child, had been broadcast on the radio and picked up by social media. People across the country were tracking the rescue effort. There were volunteers massing at the other end of the trail, waiting with warm blankets and medical supplies. She was no longer alone. By the time the sun began its slow descent again, they had covered 8 more miles. Estrella's splint held, but she was clearly in agony, each step a deliberate choice. Anna wept silently, her tears freezing on her cheeks. The path widened, and they came upon a small encampment of 10 volunteers who had hiked in from the city side, carrying supplies and a single stretcher. Among them was a doctor, a middle-aged woman with kind eyes, who immediately assessed Estrella and administered a painkiller. She told Anna that the mare's injury was not life-threatening if she rested soon. There was a horse trailer waiting on the road an hour ahead. They could transport Estrella to a veterinary clinic near the hospital. Relief flooded Anna so intensely that she nearly fainted. But there was another message waiting. A volunteer pressed a satellite phone into Anna's hands. On the line was her daughter, sobbing. The doctors had moved the transplant window to the following morning. The donor was en route from another continent, and if Anna was not there by 8 o'clock in the morning to sign the consent, the procedure would be cancelled. Time was running out faster than any of them had realized. Anna looked at the sky. It was already dark. She had less than 12 hours. Estrella could not be ridden any further, not without permanently crippling her. Anna made the hardest decision of her life. She dismounted, pressed her forehead to Estrella's, and whispered a goodbye. She promised to return, promised she would not die without seeing her horse safe. Then she climbed onto the stretcher-bearer's transport vehicle, an all-terrain cart that would carry her down the mountain to the waiting ambulance. The last thing she saw as the cart pulled away was Estrella, her chestnut coat glowing in the lantern light, being loaded gently into the horse trailer. The mare lifted her head and whinnied, not a cry of pain, but a call that said goodbye. Anna raised a trembling hand, then the trail curved and they were gone. The ambulance raced through the night, siren wailing. In the back, Lucia held Anna's hand while the doctor monitored her vitals. The tumor was pressing on something, causing internal bleeding, but Anna refused pain relief. She needed to be conscious when she reached Tamaz. She asked only one thing, to speak to her grandson. The doctor hesitated, then patched through the hospital's pediatric ward. Tamaz's voice came through the line, thin and weak, but unmistakably alive. He called her Abuela. He told her he had dreamed of her riding a horse through a storm. Anna laughed through her tears and told him to hold on. She was coming. The call lasted only a minute, but it gave her the strength to endure the rest of the journey. The ambulance reached the city just before dawn. The hospital rose before them, a massive complex of glass and steel. But the gates were blocked by a crowd, dozens of people holding candles and signs, some weeping, some cheering. News of Anna's arrival had spread, and strangers had gathered to witness the moment. As the ambulance doors opened, a hush fell over the crowd. 2 orderlies pushed a wheelchair forward, but Anna refused it. She would walk into the hospital on her own feet. She had come 90 miles on an old horse. She would not roll the final 20 yards. With Lucia supporting one arm and her daughter running from the entrance to meet her, Anna took her first step toward the gates. The crowd parted silently, and that was when it happened. Something no one seeing this would ever be able to explain. Because at the exact moment Anna's foot touched the hospital threshold, her grandson, in his bed on the 5th floor, opened his eyes for the first time in 3 days. He sat up, looked out the window, and said a single word, Estrella. Anna walked through the hospital lobby with nothing but a torn shawl and dried blood on her hands. The security guard didn't ask questions. He stepped aside as if he knew. A nurse ran forward with a digital tablet, the consent form already loaded. Anna's daughter, Elena, was sobbing beside her, trying to explain something about the procedure, the risks, the timeline, but Anna wasn't listening. She pressed her thumb to the screen, her signature little more than a shaky line. The time was 7:43 in the morning. They had 17 minutes to spare. Tamaz was on the 5th floor in a sterile room behind 2 sets of sliding doors. When Anna reached the observation window, she saw him. He was pale and impossibly thin, surrounded by beeping machines and tubes. But he was awake, and when his eyes met hers through the glass, he smiled. It was the same smile he'd had at 5 years old, paper airplane in hand, full of mischief and light. Anna pressed her palm against the window. Tamaz lifted his hand to match it. They stayed like that for half an hour, the glass between them, no words needed. The transplant began at 9 o'clock. A team of doctors in blue scrubs ushered Anna into a small waiting room while the donor marrow was infused into her grandson's veins. Elena sat beside her, gripping her mother's hand. For the first time since mounting Estrella in San Telmo, Anna allowed herself to stop moving. The exhaustion she had been holding at bay crashed over her like a wave. She slumped forward, and Lucia, the young medic who had refused to leave her side, caught her before she hit the floor. Anna was rushed to the emergency department. The doctors couldn't believe what they found. A tumor the size of a grapefruit sat in her lower abdomen, pressing against her liver and intestines. It had been growing for years, slowly, silently. The CT scans showed a thin wall of tissue holding back internal bleeding, a wall that could rupture at any moment. Dr. Celia Herrera, the surgical oncologist on call, told Elena flatly, if Anna had not collapsed right then, within reach of an operating room, she would have been dead by nightfall. But the mountain, for all its cruelty, had given Anna something in return. The grueling journey, the cold, the adrenaline, it had constricted her blood vessels, slowing the internal leak. And the painkillers that the mountain doctor had given to Estrella, the ones Anna refused because she needed a clear head, had masked her own symptoms long enough to get her here. Dr. Herrera would later say that Anna had survived through a confluence of circumstances so improbable that they defied medical logic. She called it a miracle of timing. The surgery lasted 6 hours. When Anna woke, she learned 2 things. The tumor was benign. It had never been cancer. The original doctors had misread the biopsy, and Anna, not wanting to burden her family, had never sought a second opinion. All these months, she believed she was dying, and she wasn't. The second thing she learned was that Tamaz's transplant had been a success. The donor marrow was engrafting. His white blood cell count was rising. For the first time in 2 years, the doctors were using a word Anna had never dared to hope for: remission. Anna wept in that hospital bed, the tears soaking through her hospital gown. She had come to the city prepared to say goodbye to her grandson, to her own life. Instead, she had been handed a future she never imagined. But even in that flood of relief, her thoughts kept drifting back to the mountain, to Estrella. The horse was in a veterinary clinic 3 miles away, her legs splintered and medicated. The vet had said the wound would heal, though the mare might always walk with a slight limp. Anna demanded to see her. When the doctors said she was too weak to travel, she looked at them with the same fierce determination that had carried her over a crumbling highway. I walked 90 miles to save my grandson. Do you think I will not walk 3 more for my horse? They wheeled her to the veterinary clinic 2 days later. Estrella was in a large recovery stall, her leg bandaged, her coat brushed clean. When she saw Anna, she let out a nicker so loud that the vet techs came running. Anna pressed her face to the horse's neck and breathed in the familiar smell of hay and sweat. She thanked her over and over for carrying her through the impossible. Estrella, for her part, simply closed her eyes and rested her chin on Anna's shoulder. The story broke nationally. A reporter who had been among the candlelit crowd at the hospital gates wrote a front-page article headlined, "The Grandmother Who Rode Through Hell." Within a week, it had been translated into 7 languages. Strangers sent money to cover Anna's medical bills and Estrella's veterinary care. A local philanthropist offered to build a permanent stable on the hospital grounds so that patients could interact with horses as therapy. And Tomás, still recovering in his isolation room, was flooded with letters from children around the world who had read about his grandmother's journey. But the most unexpected development came from the mountain itself. Captain Morales, the rescue leader, had been haunted by the image of Anna standing on that ledge, a shawl in one hand and a horse's mane in the other. He decided to investigate why the old highway had never been repaired. His investigation uncovered a corruption scandal. A construction company had been paid millions to fix the landslide damage years earlier, but had pocketed the money and abandoned the project. The government had covered it up. When the story broke, 3 officials resigned and funds were finally allocated to rebuild the road. Captain Morales visited Anna in the hospital and told her, "You did not just save your grandson, you saved everyone who will ever travel that path again." 6 months later, on a bright spring morning, Anna stood at the window of Tomás's room. He was thinner than he had been before the illness, but his hair was growing back, a dark fuzz that he kept touching self-consciously. He was drawing in a sketchbook, a picture of a grandmother riding a horse under a sky full of stars. The transplant had held, he was in remission, and the doctors said his prognosis was excellent. He would go home within a week, not to the cramped apartment in the city, but to San Telmo, where Anna had decided they would all live together. Estrella was already there, grazing in the pasture behind the stone house. She limped slightly, a gentle reminder of what they had survived, but she moved with the same calm dignity she had carried into the mountains. And Anna was there, fully recovered from her surgery, her body strong again, her heart fuller than it had been in decades. The story could have ended there, a perfect circle of love and survival. But there is one more detail you need to hear. It's the part no one can explain, the part that still makes Captain Morales pause when he tells the tale. When Tomás opened his eyes that morning and said the word Estrella, he had never heard the horse's name. Anna had never mentioned it to him. She had bought the mare from a trader years after the family moved away, and Tomás had never visited since. Yet somehow, in that moment when his grandmother's foot touched the hospital threshold, the boy sat up and spoke the name of an animal he did not know. Later, when asked, he could not explain it. He said only that he had dreamed of a brown horse with kind eyes and a voice that told him, "She is here." People call it coincidence or the inexplicable bond between a grandmother and a boy whose lives should have ended on opposite sides of a mountain. Anna doesn't try to explain it. She just tends her garden, brushes Estrella's coat, and watches Tomás grow strong again. When visitors ask her how she survived that journey, she says the same thing: "I was never alone." And if you press her, she will tell you about the moment on the ledge when the wind tried to pull her into the abyss, and how a voice, warm and familiar, whispered in her ear, "Keep going." She believes it was her late husband. Maybe it was. Or maybe love, when it's fierce enough, bends the world in ways that science will never measure. Either way, a 90-mile trail that was supposed to be a tomb became a thread connecting 2 lives that refused to end. The next time you think a situation is hopeless, that the distance is too far or the odds too steep, remember an old woman on an old horse riding through a storm with a photograph of her grandson tucked in the bridle. And ask yourself, What would you be willing to cross to hold the people you love one more time? If this story moved you, please subscribe and share it with someone who needs to hear it. And tell us in the comments, what impossible journey would you make for love?